thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. I love talking about this topic, and I'm so thrilled to be able to meet with so many of you through this new medium. I do have to apologize. This whole virtual presentation thing is still a little new for all of us. We're kind of getting a little bit more used to it, but could be a couple headaches. I'll do my best. We'll see where things go. I know we have wonderful tech support. I want to really thank, Providence Health, the Alzheimer's Society, all the sponsors for the opportunity to give this talk. It's so wonderful to be able to continue doing, this kind of work, even in the face of this COVID pandemic. And of course, thank you all again so much for being here. So we're going to spend about an hour and we're going to talk about the fountain of health. I am going to take you on a whirlwind going through some of the science behind this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fountain of health intervention itself, but ultimately, there's really only 5 little things that I kind of want you to remember from this talk. I'm hoping that by the end of this, you will consider making a very small change in your life in some way connected to one of these 5 things that we know have some of the strongest science behind them in terms of helping you age the best that you can to be as successful as possible. The rest of it's all fluff, guys, ultimately. And you know what? It's important fluff. It's fluff that I like. I hope you pay attention to it. But ultimately, it's the 5 things that we're going to get at. So again, couple acknowledgements. These are some of my mentors, some of the founders of FOH, helped a lot with these slides. A lot of people I want to thank here in addition, again, to the sponsors for the conference today. So before we start, I need to give you a pretty big caveat, okay? I am very optimistic. And this talk is incredibly positive. It's nauseatingly positive, okay? So if you happen to be on the more pessimist, sort of realist kind of side of life, it might be a little bit much for you, and I'm sorry. Sorry if it is, you've been warned. Except that actually I'm kind of not sorry, to be honest with you, because what I'm hoping you're gonna pick up from this is that optimism, gratitude, and positivity are things that you can learn, and they're things that can actually help you in living a better life. So let's see if I can convince you. So part 1, we're going to talk a bit about the science of aging well. And to do that, I'm going to start by taking you through kind of a brief history of humanity. So thinking about longevity, if we were living in prehistoric times, our life expectancy would be about 35 years. Fast forward to the 20th century, 1900, we've made some gains. We're up to 48 years, not too bad, right? But what's kind of amazing is in basically the 117 years since then, we've gone from 48 to 83 years. That's a blink of the eye in the grand scheme of human and terrestrial history, right? And yet we've almost doubled longevity. It's amazing. And it kind of raises this natural question. How much of this is your biology? How much of this is genetic? I get into this little argument sometimes with my father-in-law, who I care about very much, but is again a little bit more on that pessimistic side of life. And one thing he'll say to me is, Paul, I'm in my 70s, my dad died in his 60s, my grandparents passed away in their 60s. I'm living on borrowed time. I don't see the point in using a seatbelt. I don't see the point in exercising or eating well. And it's a pretty negative perspective. And I have to be that kind of smart aleck son-in-law who tells him that actually only about 25% of his longevity is determined by his genes. Just 25%. Think about that, what that means. That means that 75% has to do with your lifestyle, has to do with your experiences in the world, is potentially changeable, maybe modifiable. It's very empowering, isn't it? So we have a lot more control over our length of life sometimes than we think we do. And so some of you may start to think now, though, he's talking about longevity. He's talking about living longer. And do you think maybe there's an ingredient that's missing here in what I'm talking about? I think there probably is, right? One of the problems with Western medicine is we have been so obsessed with length of life. But length of life itself doesn't really capture quality of life, does it? Do you really want to live a longer life that's not a better life? Not necessarily. When I went into medicine, I certainly didn't want to be just prolonging life. I wanted to help people live better lives. And to that end, I came across this idea, kind of positive psychology, and we'll go into positive psychology a little bit in a minute, but I want to read this quote to you that I really love about this. It's from Atul Gawande, really prolific author in this area, and he says, "We've been wrong about what our job is in medicine. We think our job is to ensure health and survival, but really, it's larger than that. It's to enable well-being. And well-being is about the reasons one wishes to be alive. And those reasons matter not just at the end of life or when debility comes, but all along the way, don't they?" So what's positive psychiatry, positive psychology? How does that kind of apply to this? Well, positive psychiatry is basically the idea that we should not simply be aiming for symptom relief in folks, but we should be trying to help our clients to actually thrive. So for me as a geriatric psychiatrist, that means I want to try to help people to age well, and I do it by trying to enhance positive psychological traits: optimism, resilience, social engagement, things like that. Give you some more definitions. If you pull up a Wikipedia article on positive psychology, the quote you're going to get is the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. Another way I really like to talk about this, so Marty Seligman is a psychologist and actually one of the original inspirations for me in getting interested in this topic and in health promotion generally. I saw a great talk from him a few years ago. And again, he talks about this idea that in mental health, we often work on taking people from -10 to 0. We treat depression, we treat anxiety, we treat schizophrenia, we support people through dementia, but we don't necessarily do as much to actually help them build well-being after that point. Positive psychology or positive psychiatry, either term you want to use, takes people from 0 to 10. This is about going further beyond that. Now, one of the ways that we do this is through talking a bit about people's mindsets. And I want to give you an example of how powerful mindsets are for people. So I'm going to take you through the cognitive behavioral therapy model of thinking. Okay, this is a model a lot of therapists and psychiatrists use to think about how depression forms in people and other kind of negative thinking patterns. So imagine you're walking down the street. COVID is over, thank goodness, and you've been cooped up inside, and you said to yourself, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to get some exercise, I'm going to do an aquafit class, I'm going to do something like that. You're walking down the street, and across the street, you see somebody who you recognize, and you wave at them, and you're waving, and they don't respond. They just walk by. What kind of thoughts are going to go through your head when that happens? You might think to yourself, oh, they just ignored me. Do they not like me? Am I not likable? What's the point? Why am I going out? Why am I even doing this? Why am I trying to exercise? I might as well just stay inside. I look like an idiot. People are judging me because I'm just waving, and I look strange. And what are your emotions going to be? Well, you're going to feel pretty sad, I think, if you start having those kinds of thoughts, aren't you? Maybe you'll be a little angry, a little embarrassed, and maybe you'll just say to yourself, forget it. I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm not going to go to aquafit. I'm going home. And you go home and you sit on your couch and you start to think to yourself, well, there it is again. I failed at doing this. I can never seem to get going for exercising. I guess I'm just a failure. And you might start to feel more sad. And what you can see, I'm painting a very depressing picture here, is this negative spiral that can happen to people. And this is one of the ways we think about depression in mental health. These negative thought patterns, these cognitive distortions are what we call them. The wonderful thing about this is we can flip this thing upside down and use these same principles to help people to live better lives and to get out of depression. And so say you're walking down the street and you catch those negative thoughts about the person across the street, but then you say to yourself, whoa, wait a minute. Did they ignore me or did they just not see me? Are they having a bad day? Is that what's going on here? Maybe I should call them. And maybe you'll feel a little better when you have those more rational thoughts, and maybe you will go out to the gym. And so the way we think about things is incredibly powerful. Now, I want to talk more about the power of mindsets with a couple more examples. So the 4-minute mile, this was supposed to be unbreakable. Roger Bannister, well, he thought otherwise. And in May of 1954, he broke that record. He spent months training, analyzing his running. And this, folks, was a game changer for the whole field. After this, lots of people were breaking that barrier because he broke through that whole mindset that it was unbreakable. And this is a great example from Christine Podesky. She's a prominent cognitive behavioral therapist, and she uses it to demonstrate again how powerful our thoughts and attitudes can be with regard to our actions. So let's talk about some other frameworks here. So many of you might recognize this. This is a dramatic sculpture by Louise Bourgeois. It's in front of the National Art Gallery in Ottawa. Now, there are also copies in in London, Tokyo, Spain, South Korea, and in Qatar. And what I kind of love about this is that Louise Bourgeois was 88 when she made this thing. Pretty incredible accomplishment, isn't it? It sold for $3.2 million in 2005. Not too bad, right? 2007, Robert Malchon, at the age of 105, sets a new record. He bikes 22 kilometers in 1 hour at the National Velodrome in France. Mr. Malchon only started competitive cycling at the age of 68. Can you imagine that? Now, these, I guess, are some examples that I'm giving to you because I'm trying to challenge stereotypes that we have about older individuals. And I'm trying to help people see the breadth of possibility that can exist out there. The Japanese have this nice term, it's Wabi Sabi, and it's for the appreciation and intrinsic value of things that have grown old or worn with time. So as Barbara Bloom puts it, when the Japanese mend broken objects, they aggrandize the damage by filling the cracks with gold because they believe that when something has suffered damage and has a history, it becomes more beautiful. Isn't that a wonderful image? Appreciating the adversity that something has gone through. And it's quite different from our culture's obsession with youth and newness. There are a lot of negative views about aging out there. There are a lot of stereotypes about aging. And if we're not careful, these are things that can become self-fulfilling prophecies. It goes back to the CBT, cognitive behavioral principles, that I was talking about earlier. If you have these thoughts that nothing's going to make a difference in your aging, why would you change your actions? Why would you do anything else? So let's talk a bit about resiliency. Aging isn't for wimps. There are losses. There can be disease. We can lose family. Negative things happen in life that we don't necessarily have control over. How do we stay resilient in the face of those things? What are the things that are involved in resiliency against those losses? What is resiliency anyways? Roughly speaking, I'd say it's the ability to rebound in the face of adversity, put simply. And it's essentially made up of these two ingredients. So you have cognitive flexibility. This is the ability to focus on what is changeable in challenging situations. This is about being able to shift focus away from rumination about what we can't change and to stay present in the moment. And the second ingredient is optimism. And I'm not talking about kind of Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses variety, but more like this willingness to see beyond problems and to look for what is good in ourselves and in others, for what is meaningful, even in very difficult situations. Let's give you an example of resilience. This right here is a Matisse. It's one of his brilliant and vibrant cutouts. So by his early 80s, Matisse was suffering. He'd had a heart attack, he had a lung disorder, he had gastrointestinal problems. All of this left him largely confined to a wheelchair. But this loss of physical energy leads to this new burst of creative energy that enabled him to reroute his passion for color from canvas onto cutouts. What's amazing is even when he's essentially bedbound, he keeps working. He takes these poles, he puts charcoal on the poles and starts doing art on his ceiling. I'd love to buy that house, by the way, to be decorated by Matisse. But anyway, so what is this? This is cognitive flexibility. He's found an alternative way to create art, even in the face of his losses. And it's optimism. It's resilience, isn't it? And, a key point to remember here is resilience. Well, it's a bit like physical fitness. it's something you can exercise. It's something you can grow over time. It's not necessarily a trait that you're born with. And it's something that can help to regulate some of the negative impacts that we face in life from chronic stress. And my goodness, I think we're under a lot of stress right now, aren't we? The COVID pandemic has been incredibly difficult for folks. We have had our work, our finances, our social lives, everything kind of blown up because of this. It's very stressful. And so how do we build resiliency to something like COVID? Well, human beings often try to get through stress by muscling through. You hang on tight and you let go of your self-care. And it works for short-term stresses, but it doesn't work so well for long-term things that are going on and on and on. At that point, you actually need that self-care to support you to get through this. And I think COVID-19 has again really emphasized to us that we need kind of a better approach to manage long-term stresses. So again, you have this kind of stress response, this muscle through, or you have more of this relaxation response. And so again, the question would be, what's our psychological PPE in the face of this? How can we promote our well-being in the face of COVID-19? Well, let me talk a bit about FOH, about the Fountain of Health. So in Fountain of Health, we draw on these 5 core scientifically backed up areas that can be helpful in building positive health behaviors and attitudes for aging. I think that engaging in these things can also be helpful in building resiliency during COVID and in getting through what we're all going through right now. So what are they? Well, they're changing how we think about aging, staying socially connected, keeping physically active, engaging in lifelong learning, and taking care of our mental health. Okay, what's the science behind this? Why am I telling you that these 5 things are good? Let's go through this a little bit. So I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think will lead to the longest life? Is it having a low weight, a low blood pressure, and a low cholesterol? Is it being a non-smoker or someone who exercises? Is it simply thinking that you've aged well? Well, this is neat. This comes out of a study done at Yale. And the authors took 660 people over 50, and they followed them for a couple decades, for like 23 years, kept checking in with these folks as they aged for 23 years after the age of 50. And what they found is that if a participant had a low blood pressure, low cholesterol, low weight at the beginning of the study, they tended to live 1 to 3 years longer than those who didn't. It was pretty good, right? A 1 to 3 year life bonus. Now, if you were a non-smoker or you tended to exercise at the beginning of this study, you gained between 1 to 4 years. Again, not bad, right? A few extra years. Now, what's amazing is if at the age of 50, when you started this study, you had positive self-perceptions of aging, you felt aging was okay, you felt you'd aged well, your longevity was increased by 7.5 years. 7.5 years simply because you thought that you'd aged well. It's incredible. Doesn't it really show the power of the mind and of perspective here? Let me give you another example here. So let's talk about healthy behavior. So this is coming from a German study where over a 6-year period, the authors looked at about 4,000 middle-aged and older-aged adults. And again, looking at these folks, what they found is that people who had more positive views on aging, again, they walked more, and they tended to increase their walking over time. What's neat here too is it wasn't even really connected to actual objective health, okay? So even people who were more frail, who had significant health issues, if they had the positive views on aging, they walked more. It's neat, right? Just thinking positively about aging makes a difference in how you take care of yourself. Now, you might think again that this is intrinsic, that people are born optimistic, that there's no hope, kind of, if you're negative in your outlook or more pessimistic. So this is a neat study. Again, same authors from Germany. The outcome of the study, now they took like a large group of folks and they wanted to see what kinds of interventions, what kinds of things they could do that would make these folks exercise more often. So they randomized into 4 different groups. So one of the groups was a passive control. They didn't give them any instructions and they just waited to see how much exercise they do. Another group was randomized to doing some volunteer work. Another group was given a personal trainer, basically some planning for physical activity. And the 4th group went through a 3-hour views on aging lecture. Now, what do you think happens here? You could probably predict what I'm going to say based on how I've been talking to you up to now. The group who had a 3-hour lecture on aging positively was the only group out of all 4 of these to start exercising more often. All it took was 3 hours. 3 hours of education on thinking more positively about aging. That's incredible. It really is mind over matter in a lot of ways, isn't it? So let's give some more examples of things. Let's look at the negative side of this. So it's another neat study that shows how kind of age stereotypes, which are internalized earlier in life, can actually be quite far-reaching in people's health. Don't worry about trying to read my little slide here. I'll give you kind of the core details. This is a study looking at 440 people at age 49 or younger at the beginning. And again, the scientists followed these guys for 40 years. So kept checking in with them for 40 years after starting the study. What they found is that younger individuals at the start of the study who had more negative age stereotypes were actually significantly more likely to experience a cardiovascular event over the next 38 years after adjusting for a lot of other variables. So if you had negative age stereotypes at the beginning of the study, you were more likely to have a heart attack, a stroke, a clot, something like that. It's incredible. Again, all just based on negative biases. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that some element of optimism and positive views on aging is important in our well-being. Let's talk about exercise now. We know exercise is helpful for heart disease, for high blood pressure, diabetes, and arthritis, but I mean, what are some of the other things that can help? Well, it turns out that it's probably the best promoter of neuroplasticity across the lifespan that we have. What's neuroplasticity? It's a fancy word. Basically refers to growing new connections between brain cells or even gaining brain cells. Think of it basically as brain growth and development. Now, up into kind of the 90s, we used to think this didn't happen. We used to think that what you started with was it, right? But now we know that's not really the case. You actually can continue developing and growing things. And exercise is like fertilizer for the brain with regard to this. Now, there are ideal amounts, but what's kind of lovely about this, folks, is there's also studies showing that honestly, anything is better than nothing. It kind of goes up on an upward scale, right? Getting up, walking to the mailbox, walking around your house during the 6 o'clock news, commercials, anything is better than nothing, which is wonderful, right? Even those little tiny things you can do can actually maybe help making a difference. You know, we have this whole idea that sitting is kind of the new smoking now, right? And it's kind of for a reason, because exercise actually has a lot of really good science behind it. So a couple studies here: regular moderate exercise, 60 minutes 3 times a week, improved thinking, cognitive function in older adults. Another neat study: regular physical activity may have reduced risk of dementia by up to 30%. Now, I think that number may be a little high if you look at some of the other science, but we do think it has a benefit for reducing risk of dementia. What else does it do? Well, it improves mood. And this is borne out pretty well, again, in the science. You know, we have a Cochrane review. These are kind of the really big scientific reviews that take all the data and do a really solid analysis to give us a direction on how we should treat patients and what we should do. And it shows that exercise is pretty helpful for mood regulation. It's to the point where it's actually a first-line CAN-MAT recommendation for the treatment of depression. What does that mean? Well, CAN-MAT is the guideline that Canadian psychiatrists and doctors use to decide how we're going to treat depression. And folks, exercise is actually one of the first-line treatment recommendations that we have. So pretty powerful for mood improvement. How about the risks? Well, being sedentary correlates with a 25% increased risk of depression in a pretty big study. So again, being sedentary isn't good. You know, again, I want to really emphasize neuroplasticity, brain growth and development. It's actually something that can continue through your entire life. So even as somebody ages, we don't want to think that that's stopped. this can keep going. The only time you should really be seeing loss of brain cells is in the face of some kind of a disease. It can happen in dementia, or it's a brain isn't really used, right? So we want to actively use our brain and engage our brain. And this kind of speaks to this whole cognitive resilience idea. Learning new things, having new experiences can actually be quite helpful through aging and giving us some of that resilience. Segues nicely into brain challenge. So, we believe, again, in FOH, that ongoing new learning can be helpful for helping you to age well. We think it could potentially help protect the brain. We know in dementia that if you have a higher level of education generally through your life, your risk is lower. We think the reason for that may be just that building up that extra education gives you kind of a reserve in your brain. It helps your brain operate effectively, even if there is some kind of damage developing. So you don't see effects of dementia happening as soon, although again, it's still active area of research. Now, ideally, what's probably most helpful are complex and novel activities. So it's not necessarily just doing the same Sudokus every week, but it's trying to actually do something completely new. Trying to learn a new language, picking up something completely different that you haven't done before is particularly helpful, probably. So, this is from the finger study. Don't worry about reading my terrible slides with too many words on them. This is basically the Finnish geriatric intervention study to prevent cognitive impairment and disability. And it's the first big randomized controlled trial showing that we might be able to prevent cognitive decline by using a multi-domain intervention. What's a multi-domain intervention? Well, these guys basically were given dietary guidance, advice on physical activity, some cognitive training and social engagement, and then really intensive monitoring of blood pressure, cholesterol, things like that. It's ongoing. It's going to be followed up again 7 years from the time it was published. And so that's positive, a little bit of evidence that we're seeing again around preventing dementia potentially. And again, there's a meta to why I'm saying some of this stuff to you. So it's all quite positive, right? And as this JAMA patient page demonstrates, people can probably take active steps to reduce their risk of dementia. And this kind of goes back to CBT principles, just knowing that there's things you can do to maybe reshape your future and the way you age, that you have some power, that you have some agency in the face of this, can potentially play a large role in impacting everything else in your life. This is from a Lancet study. It was big in the news in 2017, and it was actually repeated in 2020 and was big in the news again. This is a big review, actually, not really a study, talking about these 9 lifestyle factors that are probably responsible for about 35% of the dementia burden. Okay, so if we get rid of these things, we can erase potentially 35% of that burden of dementia. And these are all lifestyle things. They're things that are potentially modifiable. So what are they? Well, we're talking about not finishing secondary education in early life. That's a risk. High blood pressure, obesity, and hearing loss in midlife. Those are risks. By the way, if you correct the hearing loss, that fixes the problem. So if you have hearing loss, get hearing aids. Smoking, depression, physical inactivity, social isolation, and diabetes in later life. They're all potentially modifiable things, right? Potentially things that we can do something about. It should be kind of empowering almost to think about this, right? 2020, the same factors were published, but they started talking about some other areas too. So excessive alcohol consumption, traumatic brain injuries, and air pollution were added into the mix as well as potentially modifiable factors that would explain about 40% of the incidence of dementia. So where are those bite comments? Okay, let's talk a bit about social connectedness now. So this is a basic human need which heavily influences brain health. It's associated with a lower risk of dementia, having more social connections. And so finding ways to continue to build and to rebuild social connections and attachment relationships over a long life is really actually quite critical to healthy aging. And this is a huge social challenge for us, isn't it? How do we stay connected in Western culture where we segregate our seniors to some extent. We institutionalize people. How do we maintain connection between people in the face of that? That's a really important thing to consider, right? We have to think about things like age-friendly communities. We have to think about intergenerational choirs, intergenerational daycares, these sorts of things which are important for maintaining connection to people. Let's take a look at the findings of the world's longest running research project on healthy aging and resilience. So now in its 75th year of follow-up, the Harvard study of adult development originally took 774, I think it was, or sorry, 724 subjects and followed them again over 75 years. And 60 of the original subjects were still alive and still participating in the study in their 90s. So nice long cohort study, good study. And what they found is that at age 50, if you had a secure relationship, this was the single most predictive variable related to your sense of well-being over 25 years after that, regardless of your background. What's a secure relationship? Well, I'm talking about the kind of person you could call in the middle of the night if you had some kind of an emergency, someone you feel close to, someone you feel you can share your soul to, be open with. These close relationships are incredibly important to maintain. We need to hold on to those. The health risks associated with loneliness are bad. They're similar to smoking and obesity's health risk. When elderly folks are socially isolated, they tend to have higher risks of infection, of depression, of cognitive decline. And again, if you look at a big Swiss health survey of 20,000 people, again, similar sorts of ideas. Being lonely is associated with a whole bunch of negative things. And as I talk about this, I do want to give you a caveat here, because this can easily be misinterpreted as kind of a tyranny of extroversion. I'm not saying to you that you need to be a social butterfly, that you need to be out every night seeing people and doing things, not that we even can be out every night now, but anyways, I'm not saying that to you. It's not about extroversion. This is about your sense of loneliness. This is about trying to fight that sense of loneliness. Introverts don't necessarily have these large networks of people, but being connected to other people is still very important for an introverted person. They still have their closer, smaller networks of people, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying you're at big risk of aging poorly if you're an introvert and don't have a big network. It's more about your subjective sense of what you feel. Am I connected in the way I want to be connected? Do I have the friends and family around me who I need? We need to work as a society to manage that, because social connection is incredibly important. Okay, I've talked for about 30 minutes. Some of you may be getting a bit sleepy. We know from human attention that 20, 30 minutes is about as long as it should go before there's some kind of a breakup. So we're going to switch it up a little bit. Now, normally I would use online polling right now, but I'm a little terrified that GoToWebinar is going to crash my computer. So I don't want to do that. We're going to do this old school analog style. I'd like you to get a paper and a pen, if you have one handy around, just something to kind of jot something down. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I want you to think about the answers and just kind of jot down the answers. So we're going to go through 5 questions, again, related to the 5 areas that I've talked about here. And my first question I want to ask you is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself in terms of being socially connected to others, with 1 being not at all connected and 10 being very connected? Just go ahead and jot down a number for that. Second question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself in terms of being interested in learning new things, with 1 being not at all interested and 10 being very interested? Third question. Sometimes the hardest one for people to answer, but using your own definition, how would you rate yourself in terms of successful aging, with 1 being amongst the least successful and 10 being amongst the most successful in how you've aged? Fourth question. How would you rate yourself in terms of how likely you are to seek mental health help if you needed it, with 1 being not at all likely and 10 being very likely? And finally, scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself in terms of being physically active? 1 is not at all active, 10 is very active. Okay, well, congratulations, folks. You have just gone through the Health and Resiliency Questionnaire. This is step 1 that we use in the Fountain of Health toolset. And let me explain how that works to you. So the natural question here, again, is what have we done about this? I've told you a bunch of science here around resiliency, around aging well. How do we turn that into something useful for people? Let's talk about the Fountain of Health intervention and how we've tried to do that. So Fountain of Health, FOH, is a national nonprofit. It was created at Dalhousie University in Halifax in 2011 and was founded by a group of geriatric specialists and cognitive behavioral therapists who wanted to take a lot of these ideas that I've just talked about and turn them into something usable, who wanted to do more health promotion, who wanted to do more positive psychiatry, wanted to help people to age well. So they looked at the science and wanted to break things down into something a bit digestible and concluded that these 5 key health behaviors that I've talked about are probably the best targets that we can use to help people to age well, based on the science. They took the tools, studied them, and then created kind of a tool set that people can use to try and make goals around these 5 areas. And we'll talk a bit about that. So again, what are the 5 prescriptions for healthy aging? Changing how we think about aging, staying socially connected, keeping physically active, engaging in lifelong learning, and taking care of our mental health. And I'm going to be hopefully preaching to the choir by now and repeating myself, but I'm going to ask you again, what non-medication treatment improves outcomes in heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, depression, anxiety, obesity, addictions, insomnia? What is the #1 most powerful promoter of neuroplasticity? What is the best single thing we could probably do for our overall health? It's exercise, right? It's huge. And again, the science says probably 150 minutes a week of moderate is the ideal, but anything helps, okay? Just don't sit all the time. Get up, do something. Light physical activity, 15 minutes of exercise is comparable to giving up smoking. Huge, right? For a little bit of exercise. I love this example. Every daily flight of stairs that you climb is equivalent to increasing your brain's gray matter to the equivalency of being about half a year younger. There's all these neat studies out there about this. We know exercise is a good thing. We know social activity is a good thing. I just spent a bunch of time talking to you about it. We know isolation can be a risk factor for dementia. We know that secure relationships help people to achieve well-being later in life. And we know that loneliness is toxic. It's like smoking, it's like obesity. And again, as a psychiatrist, I can tell you that sometimes when I do my job in adults, in older folks, whoever, I really wish that I could just prescribe a friend, that there was a way to make this a little bit easier in society for people, because I'll tell you that makes a huge difference. Social connection, incredibly important. Brain challenge, we think that cognitive activity, that brain challenge promotes neuroplasticity and that it promotes it across the lifespan. It's fertilizer also for the brain. And again, I'm talking mostly about trying something new, trying something complex, something novel, try to learn a new language, read something new, read a new piece of history, something that interests you, something novel. And, it doesn't have to be something scholarly like a language or reading a book. What about, picking up macrame, picking up knitting, picking up some artistic skill? These are all valid things to do. Okay, what are the tools I'm talking about? I could talk through these different steps, but I'm going to show you a video that Fountain of Health has created. Now, bear with me. I'm going to try and make sure I can smoothly transition the slides over to do this. So give me a second.
Perhaps the greatest success story of modern medicine is the nearly doubling of our life expectancy, from 50 to 83 in the past 100 years. This medical triumph means we have nearly twice as much time to enjoy. So how do you plan to celebrate that? Should you moan about milestone birthdays or joke about expecting to lose your memory? Forget that. It's time for a new approach, a change that starts from within. Changing your perspective on aging will set you up to value and enjoy those extra years. Changing the way you think about aging might actually be one of the most important ways to stay healthy. Turns out, attitude is key to longevity. Your family genes account for only 25% of your life expectancy. Lifestyle and attitude play a much bigger role. You really can do things to take care of your brain health, and that includes changing your outlook. While there's no such thing as a fountain of youth, who needs it when the real dream is to live a long, healthy, and happy life? Our goal is to equip you with the tools to do just that. The Fountain of Health is your source for science-based steps to promote health and vitality and reduce your risk of illness or disability as you age. It's a national initiative for positive aging, backed by health professionals, researchers, and Canadians just like you. We know the Fountain of Health will inspire you to become part of a culture shift aimed at helping all Canadians age well. So are you ready to tap into your Fountain of Health? Just follow these 3 simple steps. Learn about the 5 key areas for healthy aging. They are positive thinking, staying socially active, physical exercise, lifelong learning, and taking care of your mental health. Practicing these strategies will reduce the risk of depression and dementia while maximizing your health and happiness. Answer 5 key questions to find out where you currently stand. How successfully do you feel you are aging? How socially connected to others do you feel? How physically active are you? How interested are you in learning new things? How likely would you be to seek mental health help if you needed it? Now that you know where you stand, you can set a goal in each of these 5 areas to improve your health. Keep in mind, the more realistic and specific your goal, the more likely you are to succeed. To tap into your Fountain of Health, complete those 3 steps with the help of our handbook. By changing how you think about aging, you can protect and invest in the most precious resource for your future, your emotional and mental well-being. Your personal Fountain of Health. Now that's something far too important to ever forget. The Fountain of Health. Healthy living, positive aging.
All right, good. I think our video transition went pretty smoothly there. You know, the thing I love about that video is in 3 minutes, it effectively does what I take an hour to do, a lot more kind of snappily and prettily, if you will. But anyways, that is the core element or the core structure of how we do this, okay? So we start with this baseline health and resiliency questionnaire that you've already done. And the purpose of it is to help you identify where you think you're doing well in life and where you'd like to work more, where you think you could set a goal. Next step is to invite a small behavior change, to take that area and to think, what could I do? How could I make a goal around making a change related to these things? Third step is you log how you're doing. You check in every day with where you're at on meeting that goal. And the fourth step is at 4 weeks, you regroup. You think, have I met the goal completely? Have I not? Are there new things I can do? And you repeat the health and resiliency questionnaire to see where you're at. And then ideally you set another goal and you keep going. So let's talk about some details here. So not all goals are created equal. And we have this concept of SMART goals as opposed to just any old goal. So a SMART goal is specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time limited. And if you think about it, following these kinds of 5 ideas can make a goal a lot more likely to be successful for you. It's easy for goals to kind of fall off the radar. I had the goal of practicing giving this talk yesterday, and I even fall into this, where I said I should practice it. And then by 8:30, I'd kind of like put it off, and I'd been doing other things, and I'd been cooking dinner and cleaning up and other things. And then I got around and I went through the talk again at that point. But maybe I could have said I'm going to practice it at 6:30 for 1 hour. Something like that might have made it a bit more realistic. So just want you to think a bit, and you may have the paper and pen in front of you, you may not, but you had to think of the 5 domains that I've talked about. So physical health, learning new things, mental health, positive thinking, or social engagement. What one of those domains do you think you'd be most interested in? Setting a goal in your life, tiny goal. Doesn't have to be anything huge. Maybe even jot something down to think about that you think could be a goal in one of these areas. Consider a bit, what can I do? Could I maybe go for a 10-minute walk a day? Could I call my family more? Call my family once a week. Could I pick up knitting? I don't know. Think of something. So with that kind of in mind, let's think a bit about the structure of the goals that we make. I will walk my dog for 10 minutes a day. It's a pretty good goal, isn't it? But it could be smarter, probably. You could probably add even more detail to that to make it more realistic, to make it more doable. So as you think about this goal, and you think about your own goals, ask yourself some questions. How realistic is it that I'm going to accomplish this goal over the next few weeks? Say I said I want to run a marathon. Well, I don't know if that's going to be realistic. That might be a bit much, right? Might not be possible. When was the last time I did a marathon? Well, I've never done a marathon, so maybe I'm not going to be doing that yet. How confident are you that you'll accomplish this goal? Maybe that's a bit much. Maybe my goal of going for, a 15-minute run is a little more doable. Maybe that's going to be a little bit more doable for me. And then think about, when am I going to do this? When is it most feasible for me to do this? Am I going to wake up at 5 a.m? I don't think I'm going to do that, but maybe after work, maybe in the evenings. What are some barriers I might have? How likely am I to actually do this? And as you go through this exercise and you think about SMART goals, you could turn I will walk my dog for 10 minutes a day into I will walk my dog for 10 minutes in the morning at least 3 times a week for the next 4 weeks. And I mean, it sounds pretty prescriptive, but it's kind of a gift, right? Because it holds you a lot more accountable to your goal in a lot of ways. So let me give you some examples here. Walk to the mailbox 3 times a week for 1 week. Call a friend or family member once a week. Read the paper 3 mornings a week. Listen to a new radio program. CBC Ideas is incredible for lots of new thoughtful ideas. The Current, all sorts of great things out there for learning new things. Attend a yoga class. Write a gratitude journal. These are all really positive things. And by the way, I have handouts with a goal setting sheet, which has these ideas on them, with the health and resiliency questionnaire, and also with a whole nother sheet that's specifically oriented to COVID, with modifications to how we can set some of these kinds of goals to COVID. And I think we'll be able to provide them afterwards. I'll have to touch base with Christine a bit about it, but hopefully that'll be able to get out there. But even if not, it's on the website for Fountain of Health if you want to access that material as well. So let's talk a bit about the program. So we've created paper versions of these tools. We've created the paper health and resiliency questionnaire, the goal setting, all that stuff. But we also actually have an app that we've developed at FOH. It's not the kind of app you're going to find on the App Store. It's one of those apps you have to download directly from the website, and it's a little bit tricky. It's one of those things where you load it onto the home screen. So it might require a little bit of help from Fountain of Health to get it there if you're not feeling as tech confident necessarily. But once it's there, it's wonderful. It goes beyond the paper tools. You have all of that stuff automatically online, but it also has this readiness assessment each day to check in with you on how ready you feel to actually work on your goal. And if you're not feeling ready, then there's these wonderful kind of encouragements and other things you can back up into to help. And there's also lots of other great links, which I really love. So things like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is a wonderful tool for people who can't sleep, basic beginner meditation, basic nutrition, basic information on stress management, anxiety, relaxation techniques. It's good stuff. So I'll whirlwind you through a little bit of what it looks like. So this is the landing page here. This is what the health and resiliency questionnaire looks like in the app next to the paper tool that I sent there. So again, this would be step 1 of the process, be going through this. Step 2 of the process is thinking of a SMART goal, inviting a small behavior change that you can do in your life. And in the app, that kind of looks like this. So it can guide you through some of the goal setting work. This is the landing page for the physical activity part. Okay, so lots of good suggestions there on different types of exercise goals that people can make. And again, beside it is the paper version, which I'm hoping will also get sent out to you folks, so you can have access to that. Now, online has nice goal tracking software, so you can click off how ready you feel on an individual day to go after one of these goals and click off when you've been successful. This is the encouragement section, so lots of video and audio of different encouragements you can listen to. And step 3 is just tracking your progress, and then finally, at 4 weeks, looking at where you've gone, considering if there have been any barriers, and repeating with a new goal. So this is the 4-week checkout here. So it's wonderful. It's completely free, by the way. We're a nonprofit. We don't charge users for this stuff. If you want to donate to the organization, you can, but you don't have to. This is a nonprofit free tool that you can use if you find it helpful for setting goals. And I guess it kind of raises the question, as physicians, clinicians, anyone, treating folks, what do you think are kind of some of the barriers to doing this kind of work? Why don't people do more health promotion? Well, I can tell you the single most important barrier, because all of us know this is important, is time, right? I mean, GPs have these 15-minute slots. Like, unfortunately, the structure is built in such a way that they just don't have a lot of time for doing it, unfortunately. And it's kind of similar when it comes to ourselves doing these things for self-care and for our own health promotion. People feel too busy. They feel too overwhelmed to add this stuff to their busy lives. And what I'll emphasize to you is that it's pretty fast to do this, right? A doctor can whip through something like this with someone in a few minutes in an appointment, and we ourselves can do this pretty quickly. It's a nice way to automate these little changes. And again, guys, I'm emphasizing little. I think there's actually a lot of merit to very simple, almost impossible not to meet goals. Benefits to doing that sort of stuff. Okay, so does this work? Well, the science has been done. It was fairly promising in early clinical trials. So the system was tested in about 500 participants in Nova Scotia. An average of 80% of them who used the tools at least partially, completely, or even exceeded their health goal over a 4 and 8 week period. And so we went larger. Last year, we took it nationwide, taught over 2,000 clinicians about the toolbox, and ultimately got results from, I think, 380 clients who used the paper tools, and then 581 who used our app. And again, really great results. So 85% of people using the paper tools and 80% of the app users experienced at least some change in their sense of well-being by doing this kind of thing. 89 to 90%, respectively, at least partially completed some of their goals. So it's useful, right? It helps people engage in this. So I want to leave you with this idea here around the 1 degree effect. In this global pause from COVID-19, we have an opportunity to really reflect on our lives and to reflect on where we're headed and adjust our course. The 1 degree effect is the cumulative gap between where you are headed and where you want to be. It's not necessarily the result of really significant or even kind of conscious decisions, but rather it's the impact of veering very slightly off course over a long period of time. The easiest way to understand the impact of the 1 degree effect is to think about an airplane's flight path. So if the plane in San Francisco is headed to Baltimore, if it corrects by 1 degree, it would go 1 mile in a different course for every 60 miles flown. And in the end, it ends up 43 miles away in Washington, D.C. And so thinking about this, I ask you, where do you want to be in your life when the pandemic is over? What decisions can you make now, little decisions, that will improve your destination in years from now? Think about it. Okay, so again, this is the website for the Fountain of Health. Free tools, welcome to use them if you're interested. Thank you all so much for your attention.